They considered her scum. They saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone, a silent, obedient wife who could be used and then cast aside the moment that her usefulness had completely come to an end. Gregory Dalton and his ruthless mother did not simply choose to get a divorce from Samantha in such an easy way. They obliterated her. In the dead of winter, they threw her onto the street with nothing but the clothes on her back, laughing as they locked the gates of the villa, which she had spent 10 years polishing until it shone. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot to check who she really was. They did not know that the name on her birth certificate was not just a name. It was a death sentence for their entire empire. When the judge read it out loud, the silence was so loud that it shattered their very being. The snow fell in thick, wet clumps, clinging to the wrought iron gates of the Dalton estate like bandages on a wound. It was typical New York weather for late January. Unforgiving, bitter, and gray. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the icy atmosphere in the mahogany-paneled library where Samantha Dalton stood shivering, not from cold, but from shock. "It's over, Samantha. Don't make a scene," Gregory said. He didn't even look up from his phone. He was scrolling through something, probably stock quotes or maybe text from Brittany, the 20-year-old receptionist he'd been working with for the past six months. Samantha stared at him. She was 32, but at that moment she felt ancient, 10 years old. She'd given him 10 years. She'd dropped out of art school to support him while he finished his MA. She'd worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his suit so he could look like a successful broker before he actually was one. She'd nursed his mother, Lucille, after hip surgery and through a bout of pneumonia that had nearly killed the old woman. "Gregory," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you can't just tell me to leave. This is my home." A sharp voice cut in from the corner. Lucille Dalton sat in her high-backed velvet chair, sipping tea from a cup Samantha had washed by hand that morning. The older woman's eyes were hard and sparkled with a malice she had barely bothered to hide for the past decade. "It was your home, my love. But let's be honest, you never really fit in, did you? You were a placeholder, a stable, reliable placeholder until Gregory was ready for the real thing." Samantha felt the blood drain from her face. "A placeholder. I am his wife, Lucille. I scrubbed your floors. I cooked your meals. And you were paid for it," Gregory said, finally looking up. His handsome face, once the center of Samantha's world, now wore a mask of indifference. He slid a schick across the antique desk. It slid across the polished wood and wobbled at the edge. $50,000, Gregory explained. "That's enough for a fresh start. Consider it severance pay. The prenup is watertight, Sam. You get what you brought," which, if I remember correctly, was a suitcase full of rags and a rusted-out Honda. "I signed that prenup because I trusted you," Samantha cried, tears finally starting to well up in her eyes. "You said it was all about protecting the family business, that it didn't matter because we were partners." "Business is business," Gregory shrugged, adjusting his silk tie. "And honestly, Sam, look at you. You're tired. You've let yourself go. Brittany brings an energy to my life that I need. She understands the corporate world. He fits the bill of a CEO's wife. You're still just the cold-blooded woman I met in yours." Lucille set her cup down with a sharp clink. "The security guards will escort you out in 10 minutes. Take your personal belongings. Leave the jewelry here. Gregory bought it, so it's family property. Leave the car keys here. The lease is in the company's name. And for heaven's sakes, don't take any silverware." The cruelty was breathtaking. It wasn't just a breakup. It was an eviction of her soul. Samantha looked at the check. $. That wouldn't even cover the first and last month's rent on a decent apartment in the city. "You throw me out?" she asked, her voice shaking, with a rage she hadn't known she possessed. In the middle of a snowstorm, with nothing. "You have legs," Lucille sneered. "Use them." Samantha reached out, her fingers hovering over the check. Then, with a sudden burst of dignity, she slapped it off the desk. It fluttered to the floor, landing near Gregory's Italian leather loafers. "I don't want your money," Samantha said. Her voice dropped to a frighteningly calm pitch. "And I don't want your pity. But remember this, Gregory, you built this life on my back. You think you're on high, but you're standing on a foundation I laid. When I leave, I'm taking my happiness with me. Oh, spare us the melodrama." Gregory laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Get out of here, Sam, before I call security and have you dragged out." She turned and walked away. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take the coat Gregory had bought her for Christmas. She went to the coat closet, grabbed her old worn denim jacket, the one she'd worn when she'd first met him, and stepped out the front door. The wind hit her like a physical blow. The snow blinded her. As she walked down the long driveway, the heavy iron gates began to automatically close behind her. She heard the unmistakable click of the lock. She was alone. No car, no money, no home. Just the biting cold and the echoing laughter of the man she loved more than her own life. But as Samantha dragged herself to the main road, fighting the hypothermia that was already seeping into her fingers, she wasn't thinking about survival. She thought of a phone number, a number she'd memorized 20 years ago and vowed never ever to call. She reached into her pocket. She still had her cell phone. Gregory hadn't taken it from her, probably because it was an older model and not worth his time. Her fingers were stiff, but she dialed. It rang once, twice. Kensington law firm in W, answered in a clear professional voice. "How can I transfer your call?" "Put me through to Harrison," Samantha said, her teeth chattering. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Kensington doesn't take unannounced calls. If you'd like to make an appointment, tell him," Samantha interrupted, looking back at the Dorton mansion looming over the hill. "Tell him his daughter is ready to come in from the cold." For 3 weeks, Gregory Dorton felt invincible. The divorce proceedings were moving faster than a freight train. His attorney, Arthur P. Grimshaw, a man known in legal circles as the Manhattan Shark, assured him it was a no-brainer. Samantha had no assets, no high-profile legal counsel, and the prenuptial agreement was watertight. Gregory spent his days finalizing the merger between his company, Dorton Tech, and a giant corporation, and his nights entertaining Brittany at the most exclusive venues in town. Life was an upgrade in every way. "You look tense, babe," Brittany purred one evening, running her finger around the rim of her martini. They were in the emptiness of the night, seated at the best table in the house. Gregory smiled with pure joy, even as his stomach clenched. The merger was the biggest deal of his life. If it went through, he wouldn't just be rich, he'd be wealthy. "The shareholders will meet next week, once the divorce is finalized on Friday. I'm a free man with a clean slate." The board loved stability, and shedding excess baggage was actually a recommendation from the consultants. "Excess baggage," Brittany giggled. "She really was, wasn't she? I saw a picture of her, so plain." "She had her purpose," Gregory said dismissively, "but you don't leave the training wheels on when you're ready to ride the Ducati." Whatever guilt Gregory might have felt was easily washed away by the reassurance of his mother, Lucille. She called him daily to congratulate him on reclaiming the family's dignity. To her, Samantha had been nothing more than a temporary employee who had overstayed her contract. Meanwhile, across town, Samantha was living in an entirely different reality. She didn't live at the plaza, and she wasn't in a penthouse. Not yet. Yeah, she lived in a small, nondescript guest room in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. It was cozy, warm, and smelled of old books and lemon polish. Sitting across from her was Henry Cole, He was no flashy lawyer. He wore a cardigan, looked just like a kindly grandfather, and worked within the confines of a small office that smelled distinctly of pipe tobacco. However, anyone who was familiar with the true history of New York law knew for a fact that Henry Cole was a man who never lost. He didn't fight cases. He broke them up. "You have requested an expedited hearing," Henry said, as he slid a thick document across the surface of the coffee table toward the other person. "Friday at 9 a.m., Judge Patterson is presiding. A tough old bird, usually, favors the breadwinner. Grimshaw expects them to either fail to appear or show up with a public defender who didn't have time to read the file." Samantha stared at the paperwork. It listed irreconcilable differences and failure to contribute to the marital estate. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Failure to contribute. I kept the household accounts. I introduced him to the investor who saved his company in 2001. Remember Mr. Henderson? I was the one who had him wrapped around my finger on the benefits scale while Gregory was too drunk to talk." "We know that, Samantha," Henry said quietly. "But in the eyes of the court, without documentation, that's just hearsay. The prenuptial agreement precludes her from claiming spousal support. Unless we can prove coercion or fraud," she said. "I don't want alimony," Samantha added. Her eyes flashed with a steely hardness that reminded Henry vividly of her father. "It is justice that I want. I want you to understand that they have not simply thrown away just a wife. They have discarded the only thing that once protected her." Henry smiled, a slow, dangerous curl of his lips. "I had a conversation with her father earlier this morning." Samantha stiffened, and he was eager. He had wanted to purchase the bank that holds Gregory's mortgage and initiate foreclosure proceedings immediately. "I instructed him to wait. That would be far too easy, and certainly too fast." Henry leaned forward then. "We have something far better. I have dug deeply into the finances of Dalton Tech. Gregory has been remarkably sloppy. Arrogant men are usually that way. He has leveraged assets that do not belong to him outright in order to force this merger through." "The warehouse located on Fifth Avenue?" asked Samantha. "Exactly. And the patent for the new software algorithm as well. He listed them as the sole property of Dalton Tech." Samantha's brow furrowed in concern. "Aren't they?" "Technically speaking, yes," Henry replied. "But the original funding for these specific assets came from a separate trust from a silent angel investor dating back to when the company was still just a garage startup. Do you remember who actually signed the check for that initial seed money?" Samantha closed her eyes and thought of the days of noodles and late nights back. "It was the Artemis Group. Gregory said it was some kind of venture capital firm." "The Artemis Group?" Henry nodded. "A shell company owned entirely by a blind trust." He paused for effect. "A trust set up in 1993. The beneficiary of that trust is you, Samantha." The room went quiet. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to rumble. I whispered to Samantha. Her father set it up when they ran away from home to be with Gregory. He couldn't stop them, and he knew they wouldn't take his money directly. So he channeled it into Gregory's company so they wouldn't starve. Gregory Dalton doesn't own his company, Samantha. They do, indirectly. Samantha leaned back. The air left her lungs. For 10 years, Gregory had strutted around like a king, claiming he was a self-made man and belittling her for her supposed lack of ambition. He had spent her money all along. His success was literally her inheritance. "Does he know that?" she asked. "No, and neither does Grimshaw. They consider the Artemis Group a silent partner that they can simply buy out after the merger." Henry closed the folder. "On Friday, we will not only contest the divorce, we will review the marriage." "He humiliated me, Henry," Samantha said. Her voice trembled with a mixture of sadness and anger. "He threw me into the snow like garbage." Then Henry said, standing up and offering her his hand, "Are we going to bury him under an avalanche on Friday?" Friday came with a leaden sky. The New York Supreme Court was buzzing with activity. The divorce of Gregory Dalton, the up-and-coming tech star, was a side note. But the presence of Arthur P. Grimshaw ensured a gallery full of law clerks and curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to see the shark swallow a helpless victim. Gregory appeared in a charcoal gray Amani suit and looked every bit the winner. Lucille hung from his arm, swathed in furs, and eyed the audience benches with disdain. Brittany was there too, sitting in the second row, trying to look composed in a navy blue dress that was a little too tight. "She's late," Gregory muttered, checking his Rolex. It was 8:58. "She probably couldn't afford the subway fare," Lucille sneered. "Don't worry, honey. If she doesn't show up, we'll get a default judgment." That's even better. Grimshaw, a man who looked like a bulldog in his pinstripe suit, leaned over. "If she does show up, don't say a word, Gregory. Leave the theatrics to me. We'll make you out to be a gold digger who didn't contribute anything." At 9 o'clock sharp, the heavy oak door swung open. The room didn't immediately fall silent. There was a gradual hushing that began in the back and moved forward like a wave. Samantha entered. She wasn't wearing the rags they'd expected. She wasn't wearing the cheap department store suit she used to wear to church on Sundays. She was wearing a tailored white power suit that cost more than Gregory's car. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was smooth, silky, and shiny. She wore dark sunglasses, which she slowly removed as she walked down the aisle. But it wasn't her appearance that caused a stir. It was the man at her side. Arthur Grimshaw's jaw literally dropped. He nudged Gregory hard. "Is that Henry Cole?" Gregory asked, unsuspecting. "Henry Cole?" Grimshaw hissed. "He hasn't taken a divorce case in 20 years. He represents royalty. He represents states. Why is he walking next to your wife?" Samantha took a seat at the defendant's table. She didn't look at Gregory. She didn't look at Lucille. She pulled out a fountain pen and placed it on the table with a precise, deliberate click. "Everyone rise," the bailiff called. Judge Patterson entered, looking bored. Case number 4490. Dalton v. Dalton. Let's make this short. I have a busy schedule. Grimshaw rose and smoothed his jacket. "Your Honor, Arthur Grimshaw for the plaintiff. My client requests dissolution of the marriage based on the prenuptial agreement signed 10 years ago. We also request dismissal of any claim for alimony, citing the defendant's lack of contribution to the marital property." The judge glanced at Henry Cole. "For the defense?" Henry rose slowly. He did not smooth his jacket. He did not pose. "Henry Cole for the defendant. And, Your Honor, we file a counter motion." "A counter motion?" Judge Patterson raised an eyebrow. "On what basis? The prenuptial agreement is standard." "We are not contesting the prenuptial agreement, Your Honor," said Henry, his voice calm but audible in every corner of the courtroom. "We are enforcing it, specifically the clause regarding the division of assets acquired independently of the marriage." Gregory whispered to Grimshaw. "What is he doing? I own all the assets." "Be quiet," Grimshaw hissed back, beads of sweat on his brow. "Continue, Mr. Cole," the judge said. "My client," Henry continued, pointing to Samantha, "was removed from the marital home without funds 3 weeks ago. Plaintiff claimed that the house, vehicles, and Dalton Tech were his sole property. However, we have evidence indicating a substantial fraudulent misrepresentation of ownership," Grimshaw yelled. "This is an investigation. Gregory Dalton built this company from the ground up." "With whose money?" Henry asked Schaff. "Venture capital," Gregory blurted out, unable to contain himself. "From the Artemis Group," Henry smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had chased a rabbit into angels. "That's right, the Artemis Group. Your Honor, I would like to introduce Exhibit A, the incorporation documents of the Artemis Group." Henry walked to the bench, handed the judge a file, then dropped a copy on Grimshaw's table. Grimshaw opened it. His face went white as a sheet. He looked at the paper, then at Samantha, then back to the paper. Read the name of the sole beneficiary. Counselor, Henry said. Grimshaw swallowed hard. Samantha Kensington. A gasp went through the courtroom. Kensington, Lucia whispered loudly. Like the hotel chain. The bank. Like Harrison Kensington, Henry corrected, turning to the audience. The industrialist. Gregory looked like he'd been hit by a truck. What? No, Sam's last name is Haw. He's a nobody from Ohio. My mother's maiden name was Hay. Samantha spoke for the first time. Her voice was crystal clear. I used it because I wanted to know if a man could love me for who I am and not for my father's billions. I got my answer, Gregory. The judge read the paperwork, his eyes wide. Mr. Grimshaw, this document shows that Artemis Group provided 85% of the initial financing for Dalton Tech. It also states that this is a contingent loan that could be called at any time by the beneficiary, can be called due and payable. Gregory sounded. That means, Henry said, turning to Gregory, that you owe Artemis Group and therefore Samantha millions of dollars plus interest. Interest. Payable immediately, or else, in accordance with the terms of the loan, forfeiture of all intellectual property and physical assets. Gregory jumped up, his face. She's lying. She served coffee. She doesn't know anything about business. Sit down, Mr. Dalton, the judge barked. But wait, there's more, Henry said, raising a finger. By evicting the beneficiary from her home, you have violated the good faith clause of the investment agreement, which triggers a penalty clause. Henry turned to the judge. Your Honor, we are requesting an immediate freeze of all assets of Dalton Tech as well as the personal assets of Gregory Dalton pending the completion of a forensic audit. We also move to vacate the confidentiality agreement regarding the pending merger since the majority shareholder, Ms. Dalton, was not consulted. Merger? The judge looked at Gregory. They wanted to sell a company that they do not own outright. I own it, Gregory shouted. She is just a wife. She is nothing. She, said Henry, his voice now booming through the courtroom, is the woman who paid for their suits. She is the woman who paid for their office. Mm-hmm. And she is the woman whose name they have just dragged through the mud. Mm-hmm. The motion is granted. Judge Patterson slammed his gavel. All assets are frozen, effective immediately. Mr. Dalton, you are not to leave the courtroom. Mr. Grimshaw, get your client under control. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously on their cell phones. Lucille Dalton was hunched over in her seat, clutching her pearl necklace and looking as if she might faint at any moment. Brittany was already on her feet and moving toward the exit, aware that the money train had just derailed. Gregory stood there, trembling. He looked at Samantha. For the first time in years, he had really looked at her. He saw the strength in her posture, the cold intelligence in her eyes. Sam, he whispered, his voice trembling. Sam, we can talk about this. Baby, please. Samantha stood. She smoothed her white jacket. He looked into his eyes, and the entire room held its breath. You're right, Gregory, she said. The prenup is watertight. You leave with what you came with. She paused and glanced at his expensive watch. I actually paid for this watch. Take it off. The walk from the courtroom to the parking lot felt like a funeral procession for Gregory Dalton's life. The press, who usually had no interest in the divorces of mid-level tech CEOs, had been informed. The name Kensington had gone beyond police radios and courthouse blocks like a 911 signal. As Gregory pushed open the heavy double doors of the courthouse, a wall of flashing lights blinded him. Mr. Dalton, is it true that you've attempted to defraud the daughter of Harrison Kensington in this matter? Did you truly cast her out in the middle of a raging snowstorm? Gregory, are you insolvent? The questions were like arrows that pierced through the armor of arrogance which he had still been wearing quite comfortably only an hour ago. Beside him, Lucille used her crocodile skin purse to shield her face, muttering curses about vultures and lowlifes. Arthur Grimshaw, the shark, was nowhere to be seen. He had slipped out the back door the moment the judge had slammed the gavel, knowing that frozen client was a defaulting client. Gregory pushed through the crowd, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He reached his first Martin and fumbled for the keys. He had to get to the office. He had to fix this. It was just a misunderstanding, a tactical move. He could smooth it over. But when he dropped into the driver's seat and turned the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lit up, displaying a single terrifying message: remote shutdown. Remote shutdown. Contact lender. No, Gregory hissed, hammering the start button again. No, what's going on? What's going on? Lucille shrieked from the passenger seat. Start the car, Gregory. These people are touching the windows. They've disabled the car. Gregory stared at the display in horror. The lease, it's in the company's name. The assets are frozen. They had to take a cab. The ride to Dalton Teague was silent, filled only with the heavy breathing of two people watching their worlds crumble in real time. When they reached the glass and steel tower in Midtown, Gregory didn't even wait for change. He sprinted into the lobby, ignoring the surprised look from the security guard, a man named Ralph, whom Gregory hadn't greeted once in 5 years. Mr. Dorton, wait, Ralph called, stepping out from behind the counter. Access was restricted. Gregory whirled around, his face flushed. Restricted? I own this building. I'm the CEO. Not since 20 minutes ago, sir, Ralph said, visibly uncomfortable. But definitely. We've received a call from the bankruptcy court. Mr. Henry Cole has delivered an order. No one is to enter the executive suite without a federal supervisor present. Your badge has been deactivated. Gregory stared at the turnstiles, the small light on the scanner glowing a fixed, relentless red. He looked around the lobby. Employees whispered and glanced at him over their lattes. He saw the pity in their eyes, or worse, the amusement. They knew the email had probably been sent long ago. Fine, Gregory spat, straightening his jacket. Then I'll just work from home. I have the merger conference at 2 o'clock. I don't need this office. But the nightmare had only just begun. As Gregory and Lucille returned to the villa in a second taxi, a taxi Gregory had to pay for with crumpled cash from his pocket because his Company X application had been rejected, the reality of the bank freeze began to sink in. The villa was eerily quiet. Normally at this hour, the housekeeper Maria would have been vacuuming or the cook preparing lunch. Maria called Lucille and threw her furs on the bench in the entryway. We need tea and something strong for Gregory. Silence. They went into the kitchen. It was empty. A neatly stacked set of keys and a note lay on the marble island. Lucille snatched it away. M. Dalton, the agency has called. They said the automatic payroll deposit for this month was reversed due to insufficient funds. We were ordered to stop work immediately. We took the liberty of taking the perishables as payment for the last week. Maria Lucille stared into the empty refrigerator. They took the truffles. They took the champagne. They took the staff. Father, Gregory said, sinking down onto a bar stool. He buried his face in his hands. It's over. The merger. Sterling won't sign while the assets are frozen. The deal is dead. Don't you dare say that, Lucille snapped, her survival instincts kicking in. You're a Dalton. We don't lose to scum like Samantha. She's blurting. She wants you back. That's all. This is a tantrum. A very expensive tantrum. She's a squeaky mother. Do you know what that means? Gregory looked up, his eyes wild. That means she has more money in her checking account than my company is worth in its entirety. She doesn't want me back. She wants to destroy me. His cell phone rang. It was the only one that still worked, probably because the bill wasn't due until the next day. The screen said Sterling Enterprises CEO's office. Gregory took a deep breath. He had to talk his way out of this. He had to be the salesman. "Mr. Sterling," Gregory answered, forcing a laugh. "I assume you've heard the rumors." "Just a minor legal snafu with the ex-wife. Standard divorce tactics. Nothing to do with intellectual property or the voice. On the other hand, like liquid nitrogen. I'm not calling about rumors. I'm calling because I just had lunch with Harris in Kensington." Gregory's blood ran cold. "Harrison is an old friend of my father's, drove a Sterling Ford. He showed me some interesting documents, particularly regarding the ownership of the code they're trying to sell me. It appears that you did not write the core algorithm, Gregory. Your wife wrote it." "That's a lie," Gregory stammered. "Just an art school dropout. She got a degree in mathematics from MIT under her maiden name, Gregory. He dropped out of art school to hide from the press. She wrote the code. The timestamps in the original repository match her personal laptop, which her lawyers have just submitted as evidence." There was a long pause. "You tried to sell me stolen goods," Sterling said quietly. "My lawyers are preparing a lawsuit for bargaining in bad faith. Expect service by tomorrow. Do not contact me again." The line went dead. Gregory dropped the phone. It clattered onto the expensive Italian tiles. "What did he say?" Lucille asked, her voice trembling. "Sam wrote the code," Gregory whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He thought back to those long nights in the apartment, complaining about bugs in the software, how she had looked over his shoulder, pointed at the screen, and said, "Maybe if you move the bracket here or change the variable loop." He had thought she was just guessing. He had thought she had just gotten lucky. He had spent 10 years ironing out his incompetence. "She played us," Lucille hissed. "The little witch played the long game. We have to fix this." Gregory stood up and paced the kitchen. "We need money. Cash. We need to hire a new lawyer. Someone who isn't afraid of the Kensingtons. We have to fight the freeze." "I have my jewelry," Lucille said, clutching her pearls and the artwork. "The art is insured under the company policy." "We can't sell it," Gregory said. "But the jewelry, yeah. Gather it all together. We're going to the dealer on 47th Street. It was a desperate and humiliating plan, but it was all that you had at your disposal. An hour later, Lucille Dalton, the self-styled queen of high society, walked into a pawn shop. He heard to call it a secondary market broker, and she carried out a bag brimming with diamonds. The dealer, a man with a magnifying glass appearing permanently glued to his eye, poured the contents onto the felt-lined tray. He picked up the heavy diamond necklace, which Gregory had given Lucille for her 60th birthday. He examined the piece closely, then took the sapphire ring, followed by the emerald brooch. Finally, he set the magnifying glass aside and stared at Lucille with a distinctly bored expression. "I can offer you $400 for the gold value," he stated. Lucille gasped in shock. "400? But it is worth 50,000. This necklace is a Van Craft piece. It is a replica," the dealer replied quite matter-of-factly. "High-quality cubic zirconia set in 14-karat gold plating. It is all just glass." Lucille turned slowly toward Gregory. "Gregory, you were the one who bought these pieces. You told me that their value lay in solid investments." Gregory's face turned the color of ash. He vividly recalled those years of extremely tight budgets, the years when he felt compelled to appear wealthy while he was actually drowning in debt. He had purchased the fakes to satisfy his mother and to maintain appearances, having convinced himself that he would replace them with genuine jewelry once his business finally took off. Yet his fate would have it, he never once go. "I had cash flow problems," Gregory muttered. Lucille didn't scream. She didn't yell. She simply walked over to her son and slapped him in the face. The sound echoed through the small, dusty shop. "You're a failure," she whispered, "and you dragged me down with you." They left the shop empty-handed. The snow had fallen again, blanketing the city in a white blanket. But this time, they weren't the ones looking out from the warm mansion. They were standing in the street, the cold biting down. The desperation makes people do dangerous things. For Gregory Dalton, stripped of his fortune, his car, and his dignity, the only currency he had left was his voice. If he couldn't beat Samantha in court, he would doy her in the living rooms of America. Ironically, it was Brittany who gave him the idea just before she left him. She met him at a coffee shop. He couldn't afford dinner to return the spare key to his apartment. "You're trending, Greg," she said, checking her phone. "But not in a good way. Everyone calls you the Ice King because of the Blizzard story, but people love a redemption story or a victim. "I'm the victim," Gregory insisted, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away. "She lied to me for 10 years. She pretended to be poor. That's cheating." "Then say exactly that," Brittany said, standing up. "Go on TV, cry, say she manipulated you. Say she was a spy for her father all along, trying to steal your ideas. People hate billionaires. Greg, play the underdog." She left him with the bill for 2 lattes, which he paid for with the last of his cash. But the seed had been sown. 2 days later, Gregory was sitting in the studio of The Morning Truth, a tabloid talk show known for its appetite for sensationalism. The host, a man named Chip Darrow, leaned forward with mock sympathy. "So let me get this straight, Gregory," Chip said into the camera. "They marry a woman they think is a hard-working waitress. They support her. They build a life. And all the while, she's secretly the heiress to someone's empire and spying on their tech company." "It broke my heart, Chip," Gregory said, looking into the camera with studied sadness. "I loved Samantha. I didn't care about money, but she took notes. She gave my proprietary information to her father's conglomerates, and when I confronted her when I wanted a divorce because I couldn't handle the betrayal, she used her father's lawyers to make sure I was ostracized. She threw me out." And the story about her being thrown out in a blizzard, Chip followed up on. "Made up, L. Gregory. Glad she took a private car. You staged that photo of her walking through the snow. It's all a PR stunt to ruin a self-made man." The interview was conducted live at the Brownstone in Brooklyn. Samantha looked at the screen, her face impassive. Henry Cole sat next to her, taking notes. "He's good," Henry admitted, lying through his teeth. "But he's selling it. The mood on social media is changing. People are calling you a corporate spy." Samantha took a sip of tea. "He forgot the security system." "The one in the mansion?" Henry asked. "Gregory was always so proud of his smart home," Samantha said. A cold smile played across her lips. "He installed cameras everywhere. In the driveway, in the library, on the porch. He wanted to monitor the staff, but Eric forgot that I was the administrator of the cloud account." "You have the footage?" Henry asked. "I have everything." Lucille, checking her watch, me, pleading, the gates closing behind me. Samantha set down her cup. "And I have something else. Audio recordings from the library." "Publish it," Henry said. "Not in court. On the internet. Damn it." Within an hour, the narrative hadn't just shifted. It had mutated. Samantha hadn't gone on any talk shows. She had simply posted a single video file to a new Twitter account with the handle Samantha. The caption consisted of 3 words: "The truth about winter." The video began with time-stamped security footage. The resolution was 4K. It showed Samantha, tearful and trembling in front of Gregory and Lucille. The audio was crystal clear. "Lucille, you were a placeholder. A stable, reliable placeholder. Gregory, consider it severance pay. You're still just the waitress I met in yours. Lucille, throw her out, and for heaven's sakes, don't take any silverware." Then the cut to the outside camera, the heavy gates closing. Samantha, walking alone into the blinding white snow. Gregory, visible in the window. a drink in hand, as he watched her go. The internet exploded. The hashtags changed instantly. As to Samantha, was #1 worldwide within 20 minutes, as Boyad followed Dalton Tech. But the most destructive hashtag was placeholder. Women all over the world began sharing their own stories of how they had been used and discarded, rallying behind Samantha. Gregory was sitting in the green room of the television studio, waiting for congratulations, when his phone began to vibrate uncontrollably. No calls, no notifications, thousands of them. He opened Twitter, he saw the video, he saw the comments. He left her to die in the cold. Lucille Dalton is a monster. I hope she takes every penny of him. The door to the green room opened. Chip Darrow walked in, but the sympathy had disappeared. You need to go, Chip said coldly, now, before the protesters block the exit. This post, we are retracting it. We cannot be seen supporting a monster. Gregory, they lied to us. Get out of here. Gregory ran out the back door, pulling his jacket over his head, but the real blow came when he returned to the temporary apartment he'd rented by the week. Brittany was there, packing her things. I saw the video, she said, not looking at him. It's been edited, Gregory shouted, taken out of context. She was crying. Greg, you laughed at her. You and your mother were drinking tea while she walked out into a blizzard. Brittany zipped up her suitcase. I can handle and not a sociopath. And honestly, I don't want to be the next placeholder. Brittany, wait. I don't have anything else. You have your mother, Brittany said, opening the door. You two deserve each other. She slammed the door shut. Gregory stood in the silence of the cheap apartment. The walls were thin. He could hear the neighbors arguing. He saw his reflection in the hallway mirror. He looked older, smaller. The phone rang again. It was Lucille. Gregory! Her voice sounded slightly panicked. Police are here. Police? Why? They have a search warrant, Gregory, for the house, for the computers. Lucille began to sob. They're talking about embezzlement. They say I diverted company funds to private accounts. They say you approved it. Gregory dropped the phone. The freeze wasn't just about money anymore. It was about freedom, huh? Samantha wasn't just taking their business. She was after their lives. The courtroom for the final hearing was different this time. It wasn't the sterile family court. It was the Superior Court for complex fraud and corporate misconduct. And it was packed to capacity. Samantha sat at the clerical side table, flanked by Henry Cole and a team of 3 other attorneys from Kensington and Wright. This time she wore navy blue, the color of authority. She looked untouchable. Gregory and Lucille sat on the defendant's side. They looked shabby. They had been forced to have a public defender, a young, overworked man named Mr. Henderson, who looked as if he hadn't slept in a week. Grimshaw had sued Gregory for unpaid legal fees, and in the process had leaked incriminating, confidential information to save his own skin. All rise, the bailiff called. Judge Patterson was back, but this time he was accompanied by a forensic accountant who sat near the witness box, to file folder in front of him, Abiza. We are here today to determine the final distribution of assets and to hear the counterclaims for fraud, Judge Patterson said. Mr. Cole, you may proceed. Henry Cole stood up. He didn't need to be dramatic anymore. He had the numbers. Your Honor, Henry began, Dorenzian's audit of Dalton Tech has revealed a systematic looting of the company assets. Over the past 7 years, $3 million was diverted to shell companies registered to Lucille Dalton. A murmur went through the room. Lucille pulled deeper into her coat. These funds, Henry Ford continued, were used to buy jewelry, finance vacations, and pay gambling debts in Atlantic City. All recorded in the company's ledger as consulting fees for research and development. Gregory jumped up, his voice breaking. I didn't know anything about it. He told me she had family assets. You signed the checks, Mr. Dalton, Henry said, holding up a blown-up image of a check. That's her signature. You approved every single dollar. I only signed what she presented to me, Gregory stammered. It was the ultimate admission of incompetence. The supposed tax genius was nothing more than a puppet. Furthermore, Henry said, turning back to the judge, we have determined that Dalton Tech's core intellectual property, the predictive software algorithm, was developed entirely by Samantha Kensington Dalton. The patent application filed by Gregory Dalton contains a fraudulent declaration of inventorship. Mr. Henderson, the judge said, looking at the public defender, do you have a defense? Mr. Henderson stood up, adjusted his glasses, and sighed. Your Honor, my clients are pleading incompetence. They are pleading a failure to understand the complexities of financial structures. Incompetence is no defense to fraud, the judge snapped. Especially not when you are the CEO of a publicly traded company. The judge turned to Samantha. Miss Dorton, or should I say, Miss Kensington, you hold the levers here. You hold the promissory note. You own the intellectual property. What is your motion? The courtroom went silent. That was the moment. Samantha stood up. She walked to the center of the room. She looked at Gregory, who was sweating in his cheap suit. She looked at Lucille, who was crying silently into a handkerchief. I don't want you to go to prison, Samantha said quietly. Gregory looked up. Hope flickered in his eyes. Prison is too easy, Samantha continued, costing taxpayers money. I want you to understand what it means to start over, really over. She turned to the judge. I am calling in the Artemis Group loan. Repayable immediately. Since you are unable to pay, I am invoking the foreclosure clause. I am taking over the company. I am taking over the mansion. I am taking over the contents of the accounts to settle the debt. Granted, the judge said firmly. However, Samantha added, I am not a monster. I will not throw you out in the middle of the snow with nothing. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single envelope. He walked over to the defendant's desk and placed it in front of Gregory. What is this? Gregory whispered. It's a deed, Samantha said, to the cabin in upstate New York. The one your father left you before he died. The one you tried to sell last year, but couldn't because it was too run down. It was a dump, a rotting hunting cabin with no electricity and a wood stove. It's in your name, Gregory. That's the only thing I haven't touched. It's paid off. It's a roof over your head. You expect us to live in a dump? Lucille shrieked. I'm a Dalton. No, Samantha said coldly. You're a debtor, and as of today, you're homeless. You have the cabin and the clothes you're wearing. And Gregory, she looked at him. Tears were streaming down his face. Yes, Sam, I'll keep the dog, she said. A murmur went through the courtroom. It wasn't a joke. It was the final severing of all ties. Barnaby, the golden retriever Gregory had ignored for years, was the only living thing in that house worth saving. Silence in the courtroom. The judge shouted, and he paused. Judgment is entered in favor of the defendants. Dalton Tech is hereby transferred to the control of Samantha Kensington. The remaining assets are forfeited. Proceedings closed. The gavel crashed. Sounded like a gunshot. Security guards stepped forward, not to escort Samantha out, but to take Gregory and Lucille away. They had to surrender their watches, their cell phones, which were company property, and the keys to the mansion right there in the courtroom. Samantha didn't watch them. She turned to Henry Cole. It's over, she said. Not quite yet, Henry smiled. Mr. Sterling is on line one. He wants to know if the new owner of Dalton Tech is willing to reopen merger negotiations. He's offering 20% more than Gregory. Samantha smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. Tell him I'll meet him, but not at the office. Tell him to meet me at the Bluebird Diner. The diner where you used to work. Henry raised an eyebrow. Yeah, Samantha said, picking up her bag. I want to remember where I came from. And I don't want to forget that the person who serves the coffee might own the place someday. She left the courtroom. The heavy doors swung open for her. Outside, the sun was shining. The snow was melting. Winter was over. The cabin was exactly as Samantha had described it to me, a rotten tooth, sitting in the jagged jaws of the Edaron decks. For Gregory Dalton, the tech genius who had once complained about the thread count of his bedsheets, reality was now a nightmare of torn hands and icy drafts. He spent his days chopping wet wood just to keep the cast iron stove going. As Lucille sat in a moth-eaten armchair, she remained wrapped in blankets, silently staring for a long time at the wallpaper which was beginning to peel. The hardest blow came 3 months later at the local convenience store. Gregory, wearing muddy boots and counting crumpled bills for a discounted loaf of bread, glanced up at the small TV in the corner. The NBC flashed a headline in gold. Phoenix from the ashes. Samantha Kensington speaks about the future of the tech industry. There she was. Samantha looked radiant as she sat in the sleek studio, wearing a designer blazer that cost even more money than Gregory's entire pickup truck. She explained how she had tripled the value of Dalton Tag in less than a year. The code has always been good, she said to the interviewer while offering a rather cryptic smile. The company was just smothered in ego. We got rid of that. Gregory stood frozen in the hallway. He watched as the interviewer congratulated her on her engagement to Michael Sterling, At that moment, standing in the dust of a hardware store, he realized that he had never been the success story. He had been a parasite, and the innkeeper had finally discarded him. Time passed inexorably. Lucille died in the third winter. Her heart simply gave out under the weight of her own resentment. Gregory buried her in the cheapest plot available. There were no mourners, no flowers from the Hempton Circle. Alone and unable to bear the haunting spirits within the cabin any longer, Gregory decided to sell it and finally return to the city. But the Dalton name was toxic. No company wanted anything to do with him. Desperation forced him into uniform. He became a banquet waiter for an upscale catering firm and learned to make himself invisible to the wealthy, to those very people whom he had once referred to as his social equals. 50 years after their divorce, fate finally arranged one last final meeting for them both. It was the Innovators of the Decade Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Gregory had been assigned Table 1, the VIP section. He kept his head bowed, focusing intently on the white tablecloths and the crystal glasses, for he was filled with fear that he might be recognized. He approached the main guest with a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir. "Any more wine, my lady?" he asked, his voice hoarse from years of silence. "Yes, please." That voice made his heart stop. Gregory's hand trembled and a single drop of red wine splashed onto the immaculate cloth. Panic gripped him. He reached for a napkin, stammered an apology, and looked up. Samantha was sitting there. She wore a dress of midnight blue velvet. Diamonds sparkled at her throat. Beside her sat Michael Sterling, looking at her with undisguised admiration. Samantha looked at the waiter. He looked at his gray hair, the stooped shoulders, and the worn frayed cuffs of his old uniform. Gregory whispered to her. It was not an accusation, it was a fact. Mikhail stiffened. "You know this man, my dear?" Gregory wanted the ground to swallow him whole. He braced himself for her revenge. She could have had him fired right then and there. He could have ridiculed him in front of the entire table. He closed his eyes and waited for the blow. "I knew him once," Samantha said quietly, her voice devoid of malice. "A long time ago." She didn't embarrass him. She didn't destroy him. She simply looked at him with a pity that hurt more than hate. Hate means you still care. Pity means you're nothing anymore. "I think we've had enough wine, Gregory." "Thank you." He nodded, his face burning, and turned to leave. "Wait," Samantha said. She reached into her pocketbook, pulled out a bill, folded it, and placed it on his tray. "For the waiter," she said quietly. "It is a tough job, I know that, for a fact. I have done it all myself." It was $100. Gregory walked away, carving a path through the sea of billionaire laughter, and threw open the heavy kitchen doors. Out in the backyard, he sat down on a cold milk crate. It began to snow. Large wet flakes fell, just like that day in front of the mansion. Yet this time, he was the one left in the biting cold. He stared at the money. He wanted to tear it to pieces to salvage some scrap of pride, but he could not bring himself to do it. He desperately needed it for his rent. Inside, amidst the warmth of the gala, Michael gently took Samantha's hand. "Are you doing all right?" Samantha glanced toward the kitchen doors one final time and closed the chapter on the man who had cast her aside. "I am better than all right," she smiled, stepping out onto the dance floor. "I am finally free." Samantha's story is not merely a tale of revenge. It is a profound story of realization. Gregory Dorton believed that power came from a banking on a mansion and a title. He believed he could throw a person away like a broken toy, assuming they had no value. But he made the classic mistake of the arrogant. He mistook kindness for weakness. Samantha proved that true power is not determined by what you have, but by who you are. When they took everything from her, they exposed her steel. When they threw her out into the cold, they didn't freeze her heart. They ignited her destiny. In the end, Gregory was left with exactly what he had given. Nothing. Then Samantha, she took back the one thing he could never have bought. Himself. We all have a Gregory in our lives. Someone who doubts us, uses us, or thinks we're just placeholders. Let this story be your reminder. Your worth isn't determined by how someone treats you. It's determined by what you do when the gates close behind you. Don't just walk away. Rise up. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. Until next time, keep your head up